people really want to see.
Good.
Yes.
Yeah, we just had a great discussion in the other room.
I can imagine.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. Okay.
I'm represented by a speakers organization,
Yeah.
and they work with a lot of universities. And they called and they asked if I wanted to be, if I would be willing to come for the MLK. And I, usually because of the work I do around the Race Card Project,
Yeah.
in the month of February, will make time to actually go out to universities in particular. And I try to make sure that I hit certain parts of the country.
Yeah.
So I want to small colleges, large colleges, public institutions, private institutions, and Albany was one of the ones that I decided to do this time.
Yeah. And kind of with the country, what do you think is the most important piece of the country right now to really have this discussion?
I think it's
really
important everywhere. I think it's important everywhere.
Where's really hurting?
You know, it's hard to say that because people are hurting in different ways in different places. You know, so the most productive conversations around race are often the ones you never hear, and often the most painful ones are the ones you never hear also because they're playing out in places that are outside of the media's purview. I do think that universities are an important place to have the conversation for a couple of reasons. One is young people are hoping that filters that you develop later in life are not quite engaged in the same way. And there's a cross-pollination on college campuses, and I'll talk about this tonight, that I hope students take advantage of. For most of us, when we leave university and go out into the world, our lives become more pinched. They just become smaller. You wind up working with people with similar interests or backgrounds. You wind up living with people in neighborhoods of certain similar interests and backgrounds. In the main, it doesn't happen always, but experience, and there's a whole body of social science, shows us that this is often the most diverse experience that a person will have is in their university years. Well, they will be exposed to people who come from all kinds of backgrounds, all kinds of faith traditions, all kinds of life traditions. And so I think that I know you asked a slightly different question.
Yeah, no.
But universities, I really feel, are an important place for this kind of conversation to happen because of that, and also because I think I'm not naive to say that young people have an easier time with race. I know we kind of expect young people will carry the baton forward and that they figured it out and that they listen to each other's music, but I also know that it's still pretty complicated.
I hear people saying that a lot about, kind of this generation is such a great generation, so open-minded, but I've also heard I've heard the same thing uttered when it was uttered in the 60s, people said that. When it was uttered in the 70s, when it was uttered in the 80s, and these people grow up. Where does that strand develop where race becomes more complicated and these topics, and they start to lose that?
Progress is incremental and race is really complicated. I mean, really complicated. And it is, social scientists, I don't have the exact definition with me, but the social scientists, the way that they define race, it's the word that I always focus on is highly adaptive. Not racism. Race and racism just rules in division. Race and racism two different things. But racism is highly adaptive. So you think you solve it through legislation, and it pops up in another form. You think you solve it through policy, and it pops up through another form. It's adaptive.
Okay.
It shapeshifts. It moves. It adjusts, and it adjusts with time and space, and each generation has to confront it in a different way, and confront issues that are different. I mean, you mentioned the 1960s, people were fighting for things that seem almost simplistic now, for the right for the. How many of us are there? 5 of us to sit in a room together. This would be unusual. Within my lifetime, this would have been, unusual. So we think of that as almost quaint, and yet there are very real issues that we're still confronting as individuals and as a society around race today, and confronting in, on different planes. I mean, even the term race now, or racism. There's a large percentage of white Americans who feel that they are subject to bias based on the color of their skin. And I know from the work that I do, and I know from the travels that I'm engaged in, that you may dismiss that and say, how can a white person feel that they're in a power system and at a point where they are still in the majority, where they control the levers of power in so many ways? How can they possibly feel that they can be discriminated against? But many of them do. Many of them feel that the system is changed such that they face certain headwinds because of their racial or socioeconomic background. And so that's not something that we were necessarily dealing with in the 1950s or the 1970s, but that's one of the factors that we're dealing with today. So the issue is still there, but the issues sort of it's like what's in the cupboard around race is different.
Yeah.
But the structure is still there.
It's interesting, last thing you just said, structure. So, because as of lately, I found that I don't know if you knew this, probably you did, but UAlbany is a very diverse campus. But the ratio between students of color and faculty is there's very much so a gap.
So the students are diverse, but the faculty is not?
Yes. Yes. So, is that in some form kind of a vague form of institutional racism somehow? Is that where the stems lie at some level, whether it's outside the university, inside, or somewhere?
It's I don't know that I need to know more about it before I would overlay the label of institutional racism, but it is a lagging indicator. It shows that this is Albany is not unique in this. You could go through 4 years of college, postgraduate work, and get your PhD, and then do another 4-year fellowship on top of that, and perhaps encounter maybe 2 people of color.
Yeah.
In the course of that long journey. That would not be unusual.
Yeah.
So what does that say about America?
I'm sorry, I just heard this today, that 9% of our faculty are of color, but 40% of our, I think it was undergraduates, are students of color.
Yeah. So it's changing those numbers, and it's particularly challenging at university because of tenure.
Yeah.
So there's not a churn. People, you have a lifetime, tenure is a really good, that's a nice job if you can get it, that is.
If you can get it.
But when you get it, it's so people stay in positions for a very long time. But the people who really leaned into this to really interrogate and examine this also know that there are real impediments to tenure, that it is not often, that even being considered is sometimes difficult because a traditional profile is something that people are often looking for.
Yeah.
And so you don't, achieving real diversity is something that can be difficult if you have a very narrow definition of what you're actually looking for. And so you wind up hiring the same kind of people. So that's one, recruiting is one problem, and then retention is another problem, is actually holding on to professors, either because they feel that the environment is not welcoming or comfortable, or because there's such a small pool that they're recruited. So it's hard to hold on to them, because once you establish yourself and you develop a following and you get great ratings from your students and you're rolling along, and suddenly you get a call from 3 other universities and they're competitive. Yeah. And so you have to decide, do I stay here? Do I really love it here? I have my family here, my kids are in school, I've built a life here. But people want to move. So that's true for women. That's a gender issue also. It's true for many people who would fall into underrepresented populations.
Is the recent opioid epidemic, because it largely deals with white middle-class Americans, has that been something that has always existed, but now it's inflated because of that? I'm interested.
I know a lot more about what was going on in crack cocaine in our world, because I covered that in 3 cities.
Yeah.
So in LA and in Chicago and in Washington.
Where
I did the Dooney Water story that won the Livingston Award.
Yeah.
I did not cover the opioid crisis as
Yeah.
it blossomed on the ground. You know, you mentioned the middle class. It's really middle class and working class
Yeah.
and lower income communities have really been hit hard.
And it's been an ongoing thing for many years.
It's ongoing for many years, but there's a timeline that you can look at.
Yeah.
And you can look at, and in fact I just read a New Yorker piece about this, I haven't read all the way to the end, about a family that actually Purdue Pharma,
Yeah.
that produced a lot of the pain that, I think they were the original. I want to be careful here.
Yeah.
We're recording this,
Yeah.
so you make sure that I'm not misstating anything.
Yeah.
But I believe that
Yeah.
I believe Purdue produced Oxycontin
Yeah.
at the beginning. So there's a timeline that you can follow. Opioids, painkillers have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Pain addiction has been around for a long time. But what is different is the injection of all these new painkillers in the market, marketing the drug in a slightly different way, so that you're actually going after an audience instead of people actually seeking painkillers, that the painkillers being marketed to a particular audience. And so I don't know that you could say that it's always been there at the degree that it's been there, because there are things that are really unique about the availability of drugs, and then overlay that with real despair is jobs left in certain communities, but it really is more of and the fact that it's not a street drug, it's a big pharma produced a drug that then wound up making its way into communities. The one thing that can I mention something there?
Yeah, absolutely.
There are racial elements of this that are worth examining.
Yeah.
I mean, this story is covered with a certain patina of empathy that I'm not sure was there in the crack epidemic in the early 1990s, and I am fairly certain was not there in the heroin epidemic of the 1970s. In the way that it is with the through line between prescription painkillers and heroin addiction now. The tone of the coverage is different, and you have to ask yourself: is that because the victims are different? Is that because the communities are different? There's a drug that is available that can revive people when they overdose.
Yeah.
That drug is not new. That drug has been available for decades.
Yeah.
There are now EMTs that carry this drug. There are now hospitals and emergency rooms that carry this drug. Was that available when communities of color, Black and Latino communities, were in the bullseye of previous epidemics? How do you account for the difference there? So I'm not saying that is necessarily institutional racism, but I think it's worth asking the question about the differences and the inconsistencies in those
So
stories.
it's that kind of like looking at the missing white woman syndrome.
You have to tell me.
That's kind of like this. It's a media term, but it's when a child of color goes missing, they're not interested.
Oh, right, the John Benet Ramsey.
Yeah. So that was that kind of what you were.
I'm just saying the coverage is different.
The coverage is different.
The tone of the coverage is different. The tenor of the coverage is different. The amount of coverage is different, and that is not to say that it's not warranted. Attention must be paid to this issue, and I think empathy is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
But we must ask ourselves why there were inconsistencies in the way the stories were covered and the empathy that was expressed or shown to one community as opposed to another. I was in print for several years, and I was in television for several years, and then I was in radio for several years. And I moved into television, not at a local station, but I went straight to network news.
Yeah.
Not
a transition a lot of people have.
Well, more and more. I was blessed in that my best friend, who's gone to glory, Gwen Eichel, made the transition around the same time I did, and we lived blocks from each other. She's maid of honor at my wedding. She's godmother of my kids. So having, my best girl moving through that transition with me was a lifesaver, because we could keep each other sane, and we could call each other and say, "Girl, I'm having a TV day today," and get us through that. But it was hard, it was learning how to write a different way, to write for the ear instead of for the eye.
Yeah.
Very different. Very different, but a wonderful skill once you master it. Learning how to present in a different way as a television reporter. I used to have to think about drawing in my eyebrows or all kinds of things. And learning how to tell stories in a different way, with more assets, but with less time. So the stories were shorter, but you had sound and video, and you could, and as a storyteller, I loved that. It was difficult to learn, but once you mastered it, it was just having more tools in the toolbox. And then going to radio, yet again, something different. In television, the pictures always lead. So as a writer, you had to learn how to write in a way where you let the picture tell part of the story. And that's building a different kind of muscle as a writer. And then in radio, the intimacy of the human voice and learning how to tell stories through sound. As difficult as the transitions were, I appreciated every one of them because it allowed me to develop, a full skill set. And now I work on the web. I run a website, and I run a content well where I tell stories in magazine and video, and we're now working in animation, which is, another wonderful playground to frolic in. But I feel fortunate, as difficult as that was, that I've been able to practice this craft on lots of different platforms.
No, you said this beforehand. You're saying like you're really thankful for your friend through this transition. I've been largely told that when you live such a media lifestyle, when you are there, that your media friends are your friends. Like at the end of the day, throughout. Did you kind of have Did you have an outside life, or?
Oh yeah, of course. Okay. I mean, I advocate get an outside life.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a full life. I mean, I have very good friends, and I was fortunate that my best friend was also a journalist.
Yeah.
We happened to meet in journalism. If we had met some other place, I think she still would have been my best friend. But I have a sister of, I have a circle of sister friends.
Yeah.
That I am so fortunate to have, and most of them are in journalism.
Yeah.
But they are friends through thick and thin. I am blessed to be in a wonderful marriage, and I have great kids, and I'm part of a wonderful church community. So I advocate work is important.
Yeah.
But make sure there is some life in your lifestyle. at the end of the day, because work may go away.
Yeah.
And so it's good to be well-rounded life.
How do you breathe? You've been on so many platforms, and
you breathe. You just do it.
You just do it.
Part of it is being woman, honey. You just learn how to juggle.
Yeah.
Lots of different things. But you just do it. And you learn how to say no. Yeah. That's an important part of it. Is that you can't do everything, and you can't do everything all at once. So you figure out what you can do, and you say yes to the important stuff, and then you learn how to say no. You understand the fact.
What do you think is the biggest problem? You said you were talking about you've been on all of these platforms. Which do you think is the biggest problem for media going forward, and how do you solve it?
I think credibility is the biggest challenge going forward. In an era where fake news has taken root in part of our lexicon, where people are not as trustful of the media, and they don't see it as something that's necessary in their lives. They most look at their news not from news organizations, but from secondary organizations like Google or Snapchat or Instagram. So relevancy and credibility are very important, and I have been advocating for this thing I call media literacy, for helping people understand how journalism is produced.
Yeah.
And so that people can ask questions about the journalism that they subscribe to. Is this sourced? Has this been edited? Is someone writing with a particular point of view or with an axe to grind? Is this fair and balanced? And I think we have to figure out how to not just promote journalism, but promote an understanding of journalism. So
do you think there's a problem with anonymous sources? I know that's been a debate that the president brings up all the time.
I've worked in newsrooms where anonymous sourcing is rare, and usually you have to justify it, and someone is in danger, I think anonymous sourcing should be rare, and is usually, if you're using an anonymous source, then you work hard to get it on the record, and that's part of your credibility. If you lean too hard on anonymous sources, you're turning away your credibility. People deserve to know where the information